Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling's videogram on eating disorders and grief. And since grief and loss affect the entire person, body, mind, and soul, then naturally it's also going to have an effect on how we eat, our whole digestive system itself, and it's going to either affect us in ways where we might eat too much or eat too little. So we're going to look at a few of the disorders associated with that and also see how grief plays a role in it. So maladaptive coping is very common with grief. Individuals do not cope the way one should in a healthy fashion. And one of the most common maladaptive coping ways is improper eating when one is feeling low or bad. So an individual will find eating as a source of comfort. Initially, this might not be terrible, but if it continues and it becomes chronic, then this type of coping to deal with loss or if dealing with depression can start to harm the body in terms of diabetes, weight increase, or in some cases, the exact opposite, not eating enough. So there are many maladaptive coping ways in which eating can manifest itself when one is dealing. And those primarily fall under binge eating or anorexic type behaviors. So we want to first look at the psychology and physiology of eating before we discuss binge eating and also anorexia in itself. With normal functioning of the body and the brain itself, the time to eat is triggered by the brain when the body requires nourishment itself. When glucose or sugar becomes low, the brain is alerted, via certain hormones to create hunger pains. The hormone ghrelin alerts the brain to hunger. Within the hypothalamus, there is also a hormone that's produced called orexin to create this feeling of hunger throughout the body. Conversely, the hormone insulin, once one eats, reduces this appetite of hunger. And in addition, fat cells will produce the hormone leptin to report the need for the body to increase metabolism to help burn any of the food that has been eaten. So there is a plan in place within the brain and the body to alert one when one needs to eat, and also to let one know when one has had enough to eat. Psychologically, with food itself, one can have positive and negative reactions to certain foods just based on experiences, or also based on cultural norms, where one society might find a particular type of food very delicious, it might be snubbed in another society. Pork is an excellent example where within Islamic nations, it's completely forbidden, seen as a filthy animal, but many Americans love the thought of bacon on their hamburger or even with their breakfast. So the psychological reaction can be very much based also within one's culture. Friends and situations can also play a role in any type of eating disorder. If one is trying to monitor or conform one's eating habits to a more healthy lifestyle, how the food is displayed, the variety that's there, the proportion can all psychologically also affect. Now, of course, as we said, emotion and the moods associated with various emotions can dictate eating. And this is very much so with loss and grief and depression itself. So if upset, one is pushed for more carbohydrate type foods for comfort because it increases serotonin. When stressed, one might prefer the sweetness of a dessert or chocolate. So various emotional needs play big roles in the types of foods that we naturally seek out. Essentially, loss, emotion, and anxiety and depression all play roles on our eating habits. And it's important for us to be aware maybe not just for one time if you're feeling bad, but if you're going through a loss and you start to notice a new maladaptive eating habit developing, to put a stop to it before it can start to become a permanent habit within your lifestyle itself. Now, as I mentioned, there's two ways you can go in excess: too much or too little. Binge eating is a very common one when individuals are feeling depressed. They eat too much. So gluttony and food addictions are a disorder within themselves, but individuals who are stressed, going through loss, find binge eating very comforting, again, because of the carbohydrates that they fulfill a need to increase serotonin, which helps the brain deal with the grief and the loss itself. Of course, this creates chronic and unhealthy overeating habits, as I mentioned. Binge eating itself can be a result of loss, grief, can also be a loss of bullying and escapism from reality. Also, binge eating can be affected by when you're eating, the types of food and portions. So we want to make sure, if you're trying to improve your diet, when and where and the amount at a certain time that is being taken in. It's important to try to substitute food with more healthy ways to cope with some of the emotional problems one is going through. And of course, forgiveness. One needs to forgive when a lapse occurs, because it can. Unfortunately, many times when a lapse occurs, an individual feels worse, and then they continue to do it again and again and again. And then they're stuck again in that cycle. So if one is trying to get away from these types of food addictions, or going through depression, you need to be easy. One needs to be easy on oneself when dealing with these. Now, the opposite of binge eating is not eating enough. And there's two types. The first is anorexia nervosa. And this disorder very much implements what we would refer to as starvation diets. And this is due to an individual's self-image. One might feel depressed, might not feel attractive because of this depression. So they have a very low self-image, and they have a OCD idea of what perfection needs to be. They want to be physically pleasing to the eyes of society. Due to bullying, criticism at home, unreal aspirations for oneself, competition, and again, depression and grief, these can all play key roles in an individual entering into this type of mindset. To undo this type of unhealthy coping and this type of disorder that results from it, there are various, again, cognitive behavioral therapies that looks to diagnose the root cause for the disorder and why an individual is doing that. Also, an implementation of a diet for an unhealthy weight to help the individual increase their weight. And of course, SSRIs and some antipsychotics for those that have greater delusions about them being heavy, when in reality, they're perfectly healthy and fine the way they look. Bulimia nervosa is another type of anorexia. Bulimia, however, involves actually binge eating and also expelling the food through laxatives or vomiting. And this obviously is a even more dangerous type of anorexia. Bulimia in itself can cause damage to the body due to the use of laxatives, or also the use of inducing vomiting, because it damages the digestive tract within the body. It damages the esophagus as well when one is expelling food with all the various acids that are within the stomach. So in addition to the lack of nutrients that are entering the body, this poses a health risk to the entire digestive system and can cause multiple health problems in itself. So if one is experiencing binge eating, bulimia, nervosa or anorexia nervosa, one can look for help from professionals, licensed professionals, and also begin to look at the root of why these eating disorders are developing. And many times it is due to a low self-esteem. It is due to grief itself. And due to the grief and the loss, one develops an unhealthy eating habit that starts to overtake their very life and becomes part of their everyday functioning in terms of their diet. And they get away from exercise and they start entering into these various eating disorders that are not safe for their overall physical health, but also their mental health. We are the American Academy of Grief Counseling. Below is our link. Our phone number is 330-652-7776, and our email is info@aihcp.org. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.